In this video, I'll be making the first complete island and an intro cutscene for my exploration game. So you might be wondering why I waited so long before getting started on the open world. This is because I not only wanted to get the game mechanics fleshed out first, but also because I really wanted to use the new procedural content generation in Unreal Engine 5.2. This basically allows you to program your own tools to more quickly and efficiently create large worlds. So as soon as I saw the stable release of Unreal Engine 5.2, I started working on a PCG system for my forest biome. It took some time to get used to this new system, but it was definitely worth it. Because as you can see here, I can basically just mark where I want the forest and everything else will be done automatically. I already had all the assets for a forest biome and an ocean system, which I made in the previous devlog. So now it's time to combine the two. I added the ocean and made some small adjustments so the waves fade out near the shore. Then I added a new landscape layer for the sand. The sand also uses the landscape grass system to spawn some small rocks on the beach. Now let's talk about how I made the island itself. I really wanted my workflow to be as procedural and quick as possible. This way I can quickly make changes if something can be improved. So for the landscape, instead of sculpting it by hand, I am mostly using height maps of mountains and valleys. And then kind of using these as stamps. This quickly gives me much better looking landscapes. So in a nutshell, I create the shape of the island with height map stamps, paint the different landscape layers which automatically get landscape grass, and finally use PCG splines to add all of the big foliage. I like this, but it still feels empty underwater, so I started experimenting with different foliage, but nothing really looked good. After a while, I gave up and did some more research. What I found is that most of the algae and other underwater foliage don't grow directly on the sand, but rather on rocks or debris that lie on the ocean floor. This would have been a nightmare with the normal foliage scattering tools, but luckily I was able to create a system that scatters large rocks and then procedurally scatters smaller foliage on these large rocks. One of the foliage types is seaweed. At first I just placed it normally, but it was really annoying me that the player just swims through it. So I added physics to it. I made an actor with a cable component and a spline mesh. The spline mesh is of course a seaweed, and every frame it takes the end location and rotation of the cable component, which is invisible but simulates physics, and applies this to the spline mesh component. I also made a bunch of changes for performance, so for example only the seaweed near the player does these calculations. But that's boring, so let's move on. I'm happy with this island for now, but I really want an intro cutscene. This will probably be the only cutscene in the entire game, so I want it to look good. I won't tell you too much about the story, but I want the player to wake up inside a harness next to a bunch of other astronauts, and then break free before the game really starts. I started by making the harness. Once I was happy with that, I made the room the player will start in. I exported both into Unreal Engine and started designing the scene. I wanted everything to look overgrown, so instead of manually placing hundreds of vines and plants, I created a PCG tool that does it for me. Here's a before and after. The sunlight will be the only light source, so I want the light to bounce around the entire room. This requires some extra effort though, as I turned off the global illumination for performance. I'm going to make a separate video about how I do my lighting, post-processing, fog and everything like that, so I'll skip over it for now. One final thing I did was add some random moss to the suits and cracks to the helmets of the other astronauts. I also made it so one or two are missing. Once I was happy with how it looked, I started working on the animation in Blender. But first, since I knew this was for a cutscene, I recorded myself acting out the cutscene for reference. I just tried to get the animation as close as possible to the reference video. As you may have noticed, I am not animating the head. This is because I am going to remove the head for the camera and it will be easier to animate the camera fully in Unreal Engine. Then I also made a standing up animation, which looks really weird, but keep in mind I only need the arms. Now it's just a matter of importing the animation and animating the camera, particle effects, harness and much more. Finally, some sound and we get this. As I have said before, I absolutely do not consider myself an animator and it's far from perfect, but I'm still pretty happy with it. One of the last things I added was a menu system. So there's now a main menu, options, pause, credits, basically all of the essentials. But one interesting thing I already tested and I'm thinking about keeping in the final game is a photo of the week in the main menu. So the idea would be that people can send me photos they took in game via Twitter or Discord, and every week the best one gets put in the main menu of the game. What do you think of this idea? Oh, and finally I also fixed the save game system. The first island is done, but I still have a lot of ideas. Underwater creatures, alien insects you can study, and quests. If this project interests you, consider wishlisting it on Steam, or subscribe. Bye.